Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to another Scrolls video. Now this time we won't be playing the game, instead we're going to be theory crafting about deck building. Now, Scrolls is still relatively new, at least for the general public, and certainly I'm still very new to Scrolls, but I've played a lot of CCGs. I've played in Magic the Gathering tournaments, all kinds of things, and I've always really enjoyed sort of discussing and thinking about the basic theory behind things. So today I want to look at deck building, and I don't think I have all the answers yet. In fact, I don't think most people have all the answers yet about what the right way to build the deck is, but I think I've got a good idea for what the questions should be, and so that's the sort of thing we're going to look at today. So let's head into the deck builder and discuss things. So I've got a handful of cards at this point, certainly more than enough to start to have some choice in terms of an energy deck. And I'm in the store. I've been buying the 10 packs or even the single scrolls. Either way works out to exactly the same, because I eventually want to be able to build decks of every color, for example. Although if you're really just locked in on a particular color, you're probably better off just buying these versions of the scrolls. They're a little bit more expensive, but definitely more focused. But yeah, I want to be able to build a little bit of everything given enough time. So let's just filter it down to the energy cards for now. And the very first thing, actually, before we talk about the cards themselves, I want to talk about one of the mechanics that I think is really central to decision making, both in terms of deck building and how you play the game. And to me, that's the card drawing mechanic. So, of course, if you've played the game, you know that when you start your turn, you draw a card. And every turn you have the option of sacrificing exactly one card to either increase the amount of resource points that you have to spend on cards, which I normally will call mana. So that's your energy, growth, and order points that you can spend on cards. Alternatively, you can sacrifice this card to draw 2 cards instead. Or, of course, you can sacrifice no card at all. And in the situation where you have an empty hand, for example, another way of thinking of this mechanic is you have 3 choices. You can either draw 2 cards, or gain 1 mana, or draw 1 card that you've peeked at. Or actually, I described it the wrong way. The 3 choices are: you get to peek at a card and choose if you want to keep that one and only 1 card, or you can draw 2 cards at random, or you can gain 1 mana. Now, if you happen to have cards in hand, then it's a little bit different, because it actually makes the mana mechanic or drawing 2 cards mechanic slightly stronger, because you get to choose which card in your hand you discard. So it's slightly better. But in the case that you have an empty hand, that's really the choice. You get to peek at and choose if you want to keep 1 card, draw 2 cards at random, or gain 1 mana. And it leads to a lot of interesting choices. As a Magic the Gathering player, I've been trained hardcore to think about card efficiency, card advantage all the time. And that's to do something like, if I use, for example, let's say I'm playing my energy deck here, and I use Shock. Maybe I should have put it alphabetically. Let's say it costs 2, or sorry, Spark. If I use Spark to kill a creature, I have used 1 card to destroy 1 card. So in terms of card advantage, it is completely neutral. But let's say this is a creature with 4 health, and I have to use 2 sparks, and I'm using 2 spells to kill 1 of their cards. So I'm at a card disadvantage. And with that in mind, again, staying in energy, since that's my primary thing, we've got Burn here, which does 3 damage, which first of all can more frequently kill something in a single shot. And also, if it kills something, you get to draw a scroll. So at this point, you're actually gaining card advantage. And again, as a Magic the Gathering player, I have been conditioned that this is an extremely valuable thing. But of course, in Magic, the card drawing mechanic is quite different. You only get 1 card per turn, and if it happens to be a land card, you basically have to play it for mana, and otherwise that's it. Whereas in Scrolls, because you have the opportunity to convert any card to mana, and also convert any card into 2 cards, I think that I've been overvaluing the card advantage mechanic in this game. Clock Library is actually a really good example of an example of a card that I think is misleading to someone with a Magic background, because it seems like you're spending 1 card to draw 3. But it's not actually the case, because this 1 card could also have been discarded to draw 2. Or you could use it to gain mana instead, or you can simply just use this energy to do something else. And you only get to draw the cards if this survives 4 freaking turns, which is certainly a long time. On the other hand, while it's alive, it still acts as a wall. Also, you can, if you've spent the turn, if you discarded another card to draw two, you can still play the clock library. So you could discard two, or you could discard a card, draw two, one of which is a clock library, and of course you can't sacrifice another card immediately, so instead you could play the clock library. And so it does give you card advantage, but I'm not convinced that it's as strong as I initially thought. I may backtrack on this, and I think it's going to be very dependent on whether a 5 health wall is going to be really critical to any given deck. So I've pretty much gone as far as I want to talk about card advantage, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. The biggest mechanic that comes up, and again, you know, if, as a veteran of Magic, this was certainly a thing, but I think it's even more of a thing in Scrolls, and that is looking at the mana curve of your deck. And what do I mean by mana curve? Well, normally when you're building a Magic deck, you're going to have a fair number of things that cost 1, a fair number of things that cost 2, and then, you know, a little bit less that cost 3, and then certainly less that cost 4 and 5 and 6. I mean, nowadays this is more common because the decks have been slowed down in Magic the Gathering quite a bit. But back when I used to play, this was almost unheard of in professional play. That was just, it was too slow, too expensive. And of course, you cannot arbitrarily convert any card into a land card, a mana card, whereas you can in this, which means two things. One, if you really want to, you can guarantee that you can get this out by turn 6. On the other hand, you can always, if you start with this in your hand, you can always just throw this away to get 2 extra cards or convert it to mana. It doesn't just sit there taking up place in your hand and sort of wasting that opportunity up until you got 6 mana, which in Magic the Gathering could take 10 turns or more before you got that opportunity. So I've been operating on building a deck that has quite a few cheap cards. In fact, if I load my my multiplayer deck, you'll see there are very few things that cost more than 3. There's a handful of 4s, and I certainly have, you know, my few power cards, if I can see them at a glance. My Thunder Surge, my 2 Cannon Automatons, and my 1 Iron Ogre. And actually, to a certain extent, the reason that these are the only ones in there is kind of because those are the only ones I have at this time. But going into Scrolls, I wouldn't have imagined building a deck with, say, 3 Cannon Automatons and 3 Iron Ogres, and maybe some Thunder Surges, plus, of course, the Dispersal card, which costs 6 and just kills 1 creature. That would have been ludicrous to me. But because of the way that you can sacrifice any of these cards to build your mana pool quite quickly, and you guarantee that you can start casting these by turn 6, I think I've sort of revisited that idea. Now, the other thing that this deck is built on is the concept of sort of evenly divisible amounts of mana. And what do I mean by that? Well, my logic was this. My deck really has a sweet spot of around 6 mana. By 6 mana, I can basically cast everything in my deck, with the exception of the Iron Ogre. So if that's the case, and you can basically draw 2 cards per turn, right? So you pick up a card, you sacrifice it, you draw 2 cards. Well, given the combination of that, and 6 mana being the sweet spot, if I have a lot of things that say cost 3 mana, that means I can play 2 cards per turn. Now, I mean, I'm always spending my entire hand, but that's pretty good. 2 cards per turn is very, very strong, it seems like to me. If I get a 4 and a 2, that works out as well. Or if somehow I end up with, you know, 3 2s or, you know, a 1 thrown in there, because I think I've got a rigged, and do I still have the guys that sacrifice themselves? Yeah, the Copper Automatons. You know, those guys are in there. Plus, of course, they come into play a little bit sooner when you don't have that sort of sweet spot of mana. And they fill in the blanks, right? So if I've got 5 mana and I play a guy that's 4, then you can play the guy that's 1. And that works out. But a lot of the idea was around that. But the more I play, I do pretty well. This deck has been, you know, doing okay for me. But where I really struggle is against decks that have a lot of big stuff that can somehow survive long enough. A really well-designed growth deck, for example, that has Quake in it. The Quake card deals 2 damage to all creatures in play and 3 to all structures. And so what will happen against those decks is I will gain an advantage. I will have an edge to start off with. I will do well. I will continuously eliminate their creatures. But then they can sort of reset the board with Quake, and then they start dropping their very big creatures, and it's hard to eliminate, especially since I don't have Dispersal. So I don't have that really easy way to kill off a big creature. So that, you know, there's lots of reasons why that might be the case. But it has me rethinking the deck quite a bit. In fact, would it be the end of the world if I went, you know, 3 turns before I cast my first card? Like, do I need the 1s and the 2s? Again, they're still nice for, like, sort of filling in those corners, right? you got 4 mana, so you go a 3 and a 1, or a 3 and a 2, or a 4 and a 1 when you've got 5, like that sort of thing. You know, so they still let you round that off so you can always cast something. And still, you know, I can throw it out. Like, I can throw out these copper automatons if they're not really suitable, but that's still some sort of card loss that you don't want to have completely useless spells, although some situational ones are certainly worth it. Like, I'm always going to run Tick Bomb. If it happened to run up against a deck with no structures, oh, that's unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. And when it does come up, it's super, super good to have Tick Bombs against structures, for example, and Incinerate is the same thing. So, I've been thinking a lot about those mana sweet spots and how to best operate around them and what kind of mana totals to build around. For example, in my deck, even if I had more Gravelock Elders, for example, actually I have 2, which I think I just got one. I'm interested in exploring the idea of maybe doing a Gravelock deck, although I'm not convinced they're super good. But I feel like it might be an awkward number to work around, especially if I have really powerful cards at the 6 mana mark. Then, you know, except for the situations where I've got the 5 and the 1, there's always going to be a little bit of resources that are unused. And maybe that's okay, but these are the sorts of, like I said, I don't know what the right answer is necessarily, but these are the correct questions. And to a certain extent, the synergy in terms of mana numbers will only start to be evident as you start to play. You almost want to go with a notepad, and every turn in the game, you should put a little note next to it that says how many cards, maybe like what you did in terms of, did you sacrifice a card at all? Did you sacrifice to draw 2 cards, or did you sacrifice for mana? But also, how many cards you played in that turn, 1, 2, maybe 3, and how much extra mana you had sitting at the end. And especially if you look at the numbers, you know, like, oh, I happen to have 4 mana this turn, but, you know, I just played the Gun Automaton and the Copper Automaton. And you start to see those numbers, and you're like, well, what if I had, you know, I'm always left with, I'm very rarely left with 1, and I don't really have a good opportunity to play the Copper Automatons. Maybe I should take them out. You know, maybe, what if you built a deck that was, you know, more, I don't know, based around prime numbers? Because mathematically there's certain tricks you can do with prime numbers that, I don't know, that's kind of nerdy stuff, but these are the sort of things that I keep thinking about with deck construction. So I think that aspect of the theory, and that's like the hard theory, those are the edge cases that maybe matter less than, you know, the combos. But the combos are more obvious, and to me they're not as interesting to think about in the same way, right? Although there are some great combos. For example, I'm really liking, let me clear the board and go out and names if I can remember them actually. Shoot, I can't. Let's go by cost then. Because, yeah, I really like the charge coils. I think they're incredibly strong. And they don't seem it necessarily off the top, but they guarantee that they're doing 1 damage to a creature every single round. And if you can keep that in mind and sort of build your deck around that, you can reliably hit the creatures you want. It's at random, but if your opponent doesn't have very many creatures, then it's always gonna, you know, it's gonna focus fire. If you have more than 1, that, you know, 2 damage, that's going to hit a lot of stuff. Like, that's going to kill a lot of things, first of all. And even if it doesn't kill it outright, that 2 damage is a big freaking deal. And then if you combine it with things like Inferno Blast, right? And again, usually, if I'm as a Magic the Gathering player and I'm thinking about card efficiency, a lot of times this is not going to kill a creature by itself. And sometimes it will. Sometimes there'll be a 1 health creature, and then I'll be able to kill it with Inferno Blast, and that's great. And then I get the card efficiency. 1 kill for 1 card. But when you're talking about this combined with Charge Coil, even if it's not an obvious combo, there's certainly a synergy, this sort of general splash damage. And then, of course, there's the Ether Pump as a whole, which is a rare. No, this is an uncommon, which seems to combo with that. But I find that the cooldown time is a bit long. On the other hand, it's a pretty decent wall in the meantime. I also find that it's a pretty low threat device, so people don't prioritize it. So it actually does tend to get at least a couple of shots off, and that can be worth a lot. But Ether Pump, I think Ether Pump has less good, and originally I really liked it. I think Ether Pump is less good because it excels when there's a lot of creatures on the board. But at the same time, it doesn't really save you from a lot of creatures on the board, the way that something like Thunder Surge or Quake does. right? It helps when there's a lot of creatures, but you've got to count that this thing is going to trigger at exactly the right time. And it's not like you can use Bombard to help, right? There's you can use Fury. Fury can help, right? All units decrease their countdown by 1. Although, again, this is good again when there's a lot of creatures. Fury works on all units, including your opponent, who apparently has a lot of creatures right now because you've got an Ether Pump out. So Bombard, and Bombard does not help because it's not ranged or a lobber. Bombard, I think, has more place in certain decks. Like, if your deck is literally 100% ranged or a lobber, then Bombard is going to be pretty good. Except in the situation where your opponent's deck is also super heavy on ranged and Bombard. And that's going to happen more often with energy decks, but not exclusively. There's plenty of melee stuff still in there. So Bombard is going to be more frequently useful. And I particularly like it with something like Catapult of Goo, which actually I think is a bit of a weaker card, except for it's a bit of a wall value, and really, why are you building a deck out of things that are just good for their wall value? The damage is not high enough, and it's not frequent enough. Now, the goo aspect is pretty good, the +1 countdown, and you can do something like, and my problem is Catapult of Goo tends to die before it tends to shoot, but, you know, you can do the combo. Now, that is 2 cards to only do 1 damage, maybe? On the other hand, people tend to dodge the catapults quite often, the lobbers. They're able to move out of the way. So often you'll play the catapult, and then people will move, and then you simply won't do any damage with it at all. So this does give you a cool little surprise attack. But, you know, relying on combos can be kind of finicky. Also, it doesn't help that I only have the 2 bombards. If I had 3, then I might be able to more reliably build kind of a deck around that. When I'm comparing the catapult to goo, I have felt and found that the Destroyer seems to be a superior card. It is slightly more expensive, but it's got the same toughness. It fires every round and for 2 damage. And I feel like this has done much better for me than the Goo Catapult has. So I may start to just leave out the Goo Catapult. I have to rebuild it. In fact, maybe I'll go into a deck building exercise right now. I do want to say one side note, though, with the Ether Pump. There is one combo with the Ether Pump that would be extremely, extremely potent, and that is when you combine it with Speed. Now, Speed is a rare card, and it is pretty highly valued by the community, it seems like. 3 order, target unit's countdown is decreased by 3. Now, for a lot of creatures, actually, 3 is almost going to be too much, because very few things have a countdown of 3. On the other hand, Speed basically means this unit will attack this turn, period, no matter what it is. And some of the most potent ones, for example, if we talk about the Iron Ogre, has the countdown of 3. So imagine going Iron Ogre Speed. Sounds great, but you can't get carried away with the fact that these are 2 separate resources, and Iron Ogre is expensive to start off with. So at this point, you're talking about a combined cost of 10, and you have to have exactly the right colors in play to make it work. Now, of course, there are some things that can help you pull this off. If we go into, they're the memorials, for example, right? So 2 energy, you put into play. It's a craptastic creature, but it does give you 1 extra order. And since gaining an order would usually require sacrificing a card, it's not so bad that you're spending a card to get 1 order. And the advantage of using this building is that you can sacrifice 1 card to give you either order or energy or whatever you need at that time, and still play the Law Memorial. So you can actually gain 2 mana in 1 turn by playing these guys. So it does help break the curve a little bit, but I feel very strongly, and I'm pretty sure this is the general consensus, that at this time, multicolored decks really don't work in Scrolls. I would say that at the most, if you've got a combo that a 1 casting cost card in another color would help, that might be the one exception to the rule. If you have a deck that would really, really work with Vengeance Veil in there, then that might make sense, because sacrificing for 1 order wouldn't be the end of the world. Or maybe you're never planning on sacrificing at all, and you're only going to use, not this one, the Law Memorial, right, to generate your order points. Yeah, that's a possibility. And actually, I feel like this is not a terrible combo, because especially you can even throw in the Summons card, right? So maybe you're willing, if you haven't drawn your Law Memorial, you can maybe sacrifice 1 card for 1 order, and then you're going to use the Summon spell to hopefully draw some Law Memorials or some other structure that happens to be handy. And since structures tend to be pretty tanky, then maybe combining that with Vengeance Veil is good. You've got a bunch of like catapult that walls that you're putting Vengeance Veil on or something. I think the other card that I've been undervaluing for a long time, but is actually much more potent than I give it credit for, and I've got to reincorporate into my decks, is Plating. And it's relatively splashable at just one energy. You could potentially fit this into an Order or Growth deck. And the reason I was avoiding it at first is, again, that sort of Magic Gathering mentality. This is very rarely going to result in card economy, card advantage, especially since it's not an instant. You can't play it on the opponent's turn in response to something they did. You have to play it ahead of time, so then they know that it's there and they can respond accordingly. They can, hit you with some sort of like 1 damage point splash damage and then attack you with their real creature, for example. But the reason I'm reevaluating this is because one of the decks I have the hardest time against right now is growth decks, or any decks with a lot of haste, for example, which really what comes to mind is some of the growth decks. Or, the decks that maybe, again, if I'm thinking growth, you've got some of the guys, I think it's growth, that have like just the 1 cooldown. Actually, there might be more than one guy like that. And I found that maybe it's enough to throw the momentum. I need to be able to play a creature and guarantee that it survives 1 turn, and that's all I need to stabilize the situation. And plating can help with that. On the other hand, so can Spark, right? Doing 2 damage is often going to be enough, although not always. Plating, could can deal with a much bigger creature if you really need to buy time. So that might be another good example of splashing. And actually, if you're splashing a little energy, why not some Potions of Resistance? Because these things are uber powerful. Now, these are rares. Oh, by the way, the difference between them. This is a common. It has a blank corner in the top. Let's find an uncommon. This is an uncommon. It has a line in it. And then going back to plating, Potion of Resistance. It has the line, and it also has a bit of gold. And the card borders are chewed up more, right? Just a few chews here and there, quite a few more chews over here. So, if you got 3, like, these are really good. So I think that's what it's, at this point in the game, I think that sort of behavior is more. You sacrifice 1 card for 1 off-colored mana, and then you use the 1-point creatures or spells, probably mostly spells, to get something done. Frankly, Copper Tauntaun might fit in a lot of people's decks. It's basically like a 1 casting cost removal card. Like 4 damage is a lot of damage. It's going to kill most things. And while they do have 1 round to sort of react to it, it's not like they can escape it necessarily. If you play this in the same row as an opposing creature, the most they can do is move 1 row, and then on your turn, you will move 1 row and still hit it. It also does a fair amount of damage to idols. I mean, even if you're not using it for a creature. And again, I do tend to focus. I'm going to spend 1 card to kill 1 creature for card advantage. But, doing 4 damage to an idol can really... It's nothing to sneeze at. One thing I haven't done yet, because again, I'm leery of combos, like, you got to draw them at the right time, but Copper Automaton combined with, where is it? Magma Pack? The disadvantage of Magma Pack is that the enchanted unit is destroyed after attacking. Well, it's already going to be destroyed. Now we're talking about 8 damage. That's pretty sick. I mean, it would be better if it was relentless, so it could trample through things, but that's not bad. It's also worth noting that you can use this offensively, right, to kill off another creature, but it does mean they get to attack once and do a remarkable amount of damage. So you have to keep that sort of thing in mind. What's another one? The Iron Whip. I really want more of these. I'm actually shocked that I only have the 1, considering it's uncommon. Is another example of something that's got multiple uses. You can use it to kill something that's only got 1 hit point, or use it to do 1 damage to something that will then be attacked by, your gun automaton, and then that will be enough to kill it. So you can use it offensively that way. Of course, you could also use the Iron Whip on the gun automaton to give it +1 attack. But the trade-off there is that it would also take 1 point of damage. So it's actually, if you just need that 1 extra point of damage, it's going to be better to use the Iron Whip against the other creature rather than on your own. On the other hand, that 1 countdown reduction is nothing to sneeze at. I've actually had great luck with Iron Whip plus Copper Automaton, and to a certain extent, because then he'll attack right away, and for 5 points of damage, which pretty much is going to kill virtually anything in the game, barring something like an Iron Ogre or something that's been buffed considerably. That is a lot of damage, and it happens instantly. On the other hand, I've had a hard time wrapping my brain around it, because it's still, you're spending 2 cards to kill 1, right? The Copper Automaton plus the Whip. But of course, you do draw 2 cards, so it's not necessarily the end of the world. It's 1 turn to kill something off, and maybe that's okay. We should talk about more card economy. But again, I think I'm going to move away from the cheaper things more often because I think the first few turns are not quite as critical as I'm used to them being. Momentum is pretty important in this game, but I find that momentum can really be regained with some of the powerhouse creatures. And also, if you're not casting many of these little cheap-ass stuffs every turn, you end up with more cards in your hand and more options to react to different situations. Is it better to unload more stuff more frequently, or is it better to unload stuff a little slower, but keep options open so you can react? I think it's going to depend greatly on the deck. Anyway, those are mostly the concepts that I wanted to kind of discuss and chat about. I'm in the mood to maybe build a deck here. I feel like if I just built an energy deck, it would come out pretty damn similar to what I had before. So just for the sake of argument, let's consider what might happen if... So what do we have that costs 1? That's nothing. What if I did do an energy deck that was splashed with a little bit of order, mostly by doing something like the 3 Law Memorials, plus 3 summons. And summons, I mean, is not bad because... you're not losing a card. The only thing you're doing is losing 1 order mana. But other than that, you're basically you're just drawing another card. It's like you drew a structure that happened to cost 1 order. And I think that in this deck, you're going to often sit around with 1 order kind of unused, which may be a waste. I don't know. We'll have to kind of consider that. If I'm going to do this, I may as well throw in a Desert Memorial. It does mean I'm going to need 2 order around to cast it. But I think we're going to end up in a situation that 2 order is not unreasonable. I think the Crown of Strength is a pretty good card. It's maybe situational, but not terrible. And you know what? Maybe the Vengeance Veil is a good card. I'm not sure. I mean, you're spending a card to maybe decrease a countdown by 1, because a lot of times when a unit takes damage, it's just going to die. So I don't think the Vengeance Veil is actually that good. Transposition definitely has some potential. It might be awesome, it might not. I've never played with it. I've got 3. You know what? Let's do it. At the worst case scenario, I can basically just cycle it for 1. Apparently, you do have to make sure that you have 2 units. If you somehow fail to use 2 units, the card just gets burnt, and you don't even get to draw a scroll. I have to say the Sunmarked Zealot is awesome. I love the flexibility. This reminds me of an old card in Magic the Gathering, the Mog Fanatic, which I called the Mog Fantastic. This might be good. I'm not convinced that it is. Powerbound might be good, but I don't think it's good for a splash deck. I think this is more as a way to help you get more order for your actual order deck, because we're not going to need very much order, for example. Horn of Ages, I think, is not worthwhile. I can see it as a combo to, I've just put down a Destroyer, right, who's a lobber, and then I also play Horn of Ages so that people won't be able to avoid the Destroyer damage. Crossbowman certainly does a lot of damage and a cost of 1. He has a really slow countdown though, so there's such a high chance that he's just going to die before he gets off. So I think that's a low priority kind of activity. As discussed, I think I will throw in Plating. I'm going to play with it and see what it's like. This is turning out to be quite different from the deck that I'm currently using, but we'll see what things are like. I keep going back and forth on the Useless Contraptions. They're pretty tanky walls, and they're certainly pretty cheap, but I feel like I've got enough cheap. In fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to swing to the upper end of things. Get the high casting cost spells for energy. The Gravelock Elder, he's not bad, even as is. And they do stack with each other. And I am starting to have a fair amount of Gravelocks. So, I don't know. I'm gonna consider throwing these guys in. Because, again, I haven't played with them. These spiky guys are pretty decent, but they're going to be too expensive for this deck. Same thing with the Skirmishers. Relentless is pretty good, but I'm not going to fit in here. I am going to use the Destroyers. Concentrate Fire, I keep meaning to talk about. Originally, I thought this was going to be really strong, but I'm no longer convinced of it. It feels so situational. It's 4 energy for something that often won't do that much damage. The best combo I can generally expect, I mean, maybe I'll get lucky with a Destroyer hit, or often it's more the Scattergunner. Scattergunner is very similar to the crossbowman, but he costs 3 instead of 1, but he has a cooldown of 2 instead of 3, and I feel that this makes him much, much stronger. But maybe I should put down the crossbowman anyway. Walking Stones, or Waking Stones, is fantastic. I'm just not... I do have the 3 Law Memorials, right? I forgot about that. I'm running quite a few of those, so I can actually afford a bit more than I'm giving myself credit for. I think it would be amazing if I had 3 Waking Stones. Then comboing that with a few things would be good. I guess I'll run Burn. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to decide. I'm going to run that. I feel like 2 Tick Bombs plus 1 of the other spell I can't remember is good. Maybe we can run Speed? I guess I'll have to test and find out. I'm going to run the Scatter Gunners. They tend to be my way to kill things, you know, behind my walls. Metempsychosis is a way to reset the damage on a creature, or the debuffs or something. I should probably experiment with it one day, but today's not going to be that day. Mangonel, I think, is going to be fantastic if you've got 3 of them, because this cooldown reset mechanic is really quite strong. Machination Mindset is fantastic. Adding Relentless to a creature is really good. The thing is, Relentless only works on melee. Yeah, this Machination only works on melee, right? And I'm mostly going to be ranged. My melee is like, well, the Iron Ogre, but it already has Relentless. Other than that, right now I don't have a melee. I've got, you know, I could do something like the Copper Automaton or whatever, but it kills itself at the end, so it's hardly worthwhile. Inferno Blast, I think, is strong. A lot of times it doesn't kill something, but I think it's actually quite good. We'll try it. Incendiaries is the other structure destruction, and I don't mind. Like, I think 1 of those and 2 Tick Bombs is the way to go. It's a pretty sweet spot. I really like the Hellspitter Mortars. Cheap, very strong wall, and every now and again it gets lucky and kills something. Gravelock Outcast. I mean, if I'm playing Gravelocks, I guess I should put it in, even though I don't have any growth. Maybe. Whatever. We'll put them in and see what it's like. Fury, I'm going to skip. Ember Bonds, I keep going back and forth on. I think it actually is pretty decent creature removal. Oftentimes, it will just kill something in 1. Now, it's more expensive than a Shock. And it doesn't let you kill something on your turn. You have to wait until they attack again. Now, this does do damage before they attack. So if they have 2 health or less, they will die before they attack. It does give your opponent a chance to react, and maybe put a buff, but it's not worth it because this thing is going to die eventually. And it can kill stuff that's more powerful. So I think it's strong. The big problem at this point is I feel like I'm starting to get spell heavy and creature weak. And Decimation is really, really strong. If I had 3 of these, I would be basing my deck around it. Can I reasonably... Well, let's try it. I don't know if I'll get 3 order. I mean, I've been talking about how, like, the multicolor decks is no good, but maybe with the Memorials, we're actually going to pull it off. I still think Charge Coil is really good. At this point, I feel like my creatures are pretty poor overall. I only need 3 more scrolls to finish off the deck. I guess I'll skip the Catapults of Goo this time. Yeah, I could eventually get the Woodland Memorial to get growth, but I don't think it's worth putting in like that. I don't think I need the Tool Initiate this time. I'm not convinced that Thought Trap is a great spell. I do believe Spark is an amazing spell. But, frankly, what I'm really thinking is 3 Gravelock Raiders. Now I'm thinking maybe I should take stuff out. I should probably take out some order things and put in 3 Spark. I really think Spark is very good. On the other hand, it mostly helps deal with weenies and doesn't help against stronger stuff as much. And maybe if I'm playing with the Gravelocks like this, it'll actually just be a faster deck. Alternatively, I could take out the 4 Burns and replace it with 3 Sparks. It's much, much easier to play. Again, we've mostly got that 6 mana sweet spot. Again, the Ogre is the 7th, and then when I draw the Ogre, that's usually when I'll go up to 7. And that opens up the ability to play like a 4 and a 3 or something like that. But generally speaking, this 4 feels very awkward. You know, the Destroyer, I think, is worthwhile. It's got a kind of a special role. But I feel like, despite the card advantage from Burn, Like, it's card advantage, but then I don't get to cast more stuff. I don't know, I guess it puts me in a stronger position overall. I just have to suck up the fact that I'm only going to cast one spell this turn, but next turn I'll be stronger. I guess I'll give this a try, and then it's pretty late. Maybe I'll make a video for it tomorrow, because I can't do it tonight, so... I may make a video of playing with this deck. We'll see. I probably will practice against the AI first. I feel like it's probably not going to be very strong, but... You know, these are the sort of strategies and thoughts that I put into when I create these decks. So I'm going to call this Energy with Honor Splash, but it's a little bit more than a splash. Actually, I should be like Energy 6. I need 6 energy and Splash 3 to make it run effectively. I'll never need more than 3 Honor. And again, if I'm really lucky, I'll get it by just playing 3 Law Memorials. I'll never have to sacrifice a card to do it. Although, well, I'm effectively sacrificing the Law Memorial, but it's not going to interfere with my ability to get my mana up to the point that it needs to be that quickly. And then, you know, it's interesting. Can you imagine if I go Ogre Speed? Like, that would be really sick. It'll be interesting to see. Anyway, that is it, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.